Thank you for all you do to support healthy rivers and streams and other freshwater ecosystems in the West. I'm really pleased to be here. Again, my name is Amy McNamara. I'm on the freshwater ecosystems team at Natural Resources Defense Council based in Bozeman, Montana. And Emily Downing was the one who or invited me to join and present today because she actually participated in the project that I'm going to talk about. And when Emily and I chatted, we agreed that what would be most useful is not to talk about the resource itself, although I'm happy to take questions about that. And I know Emily's going to drop a link into the chat here soon about for the messaging handbook that we developed in partnership with a large number of people, which I'll describe, but more about why we did it and the benefits that we hoped would accrue from the project, and and really the process we went through and what we've learned since in terms of the value of the project and how people are using it. So um, I get to work on sort of a suite of issues that are all tied to nature-based solutions for rivers and streams. Um, and some people call it riverscape restoration. It given the role beavers play, often it is called beaver-based restoration. People sometimes call it floodplain reconnection or reconnecting streams with their floodplains. And there are many different ways of talking about the work that I advocate for. And this is one of the reasons that we took on this project was there has been we're just so lucky in the West to have so many dedicated people and agencies and tribes and NGOs that are working together to improve the health of our stream and river systems. And and many were sharing that struggle that they were having sort of in conveying the benefits of this work, how this work happens, sort of using technical terms like low-tech process-based restoration and things that you automatically sort of lose people, or you can lose people really quickly by using terms like that or acronyms and such. And really felt that they wanted simple ways to talk about how our streams got to the way they are today and what we can do to improve the health of them, and specifically how do we talk to decision makers about that so they can better understand the health of these systems and the funding that is needed to improve these systems and really all the benefits that come with improving the health of stream and river systems. And so I was working across many partners, and I was hearing that I was experiencing it myself too, in whether I was talking to members of Congress or their staff or other decision makers about this work. I found that I was getting all tangled up in how we talk about this and what's the best arc of the narrative to help people understand that the streams, that are down there, they're close streams, that they might live down the street from or hike along, that they are often really degraded, even though they are still really pretty, but that they are not as healthy as they can be and as we need them to be. And so we wanted to, oh, and I'll share one other anecdote. In doing some advocacy related to this, to restoring these systems and advocating for them, I actually had one agency leader who flat out said, you need to find a better way to talk about these systems. You can't use this term riverscapes. It's like, I don't know what that means. I can't use that term when I'm talking with people that like normal people out on the ground. I can't go around using that term that people don't know. Like, you need to figure out plain language that you can use, but then I can learn to use and talk about these systems as if I, as our agency embarks on investing more deeply in this space. And so that really led us to sort of seeking out a partner and um, a funding partner, and then ultimately a set of partners who sort of shared the desire to have some tools to talk about these systems using plain language, and ultimately a communications partner, sort of a consultant that we brought onto the project. So we had I mean, ultimately, our goal was we wanted to build momentum and understanding faster for the benefits of these systems and the need to invest in them. So we wanted to first, through this project, build a common narrative on healthy stream and river systems in order to increase the pace, scale, and impact of conservation, restoration of streams and rivers in the West. We wanted to create messaging that was responsive to the moment and that could stand the test of time. There's a lot of changes in our politics, and we didn't, and we started this project under one administration. We finished it under a second, but we didn't really, we knew that some states in the West are more progressive and needed to be able to talk about sort of all the benefits. And we knew that there were other states in the West too that there was a safer set of benefits to talk about, or a more narrow set of benefits that would excite decision makers. And so we really tried to create a tool that included both and really led with the benefits related to um, drought and fire resilience and flooding resilience. We felt that those were consistent needs across the entire West and benefits that partners could talk about and would be salient with decision makers. And then um, we we through this project, while I think the tool can be used to talk to many people, we were very specifically focused on decision makers. Um, and as you all know, when you're developing communication materials, it's really important to know your audience. And we weren't trying to talk to everybody through this tool. We were trying to figure out what are the messages that decision makers needed to hear, whether that's natural resource agencies, staff at the state level, whether it's congressional staff, whether it's agency, it's staff, the Forest Service or BLM, sort of higher leadership level decision makers. That is really what we were trying to focus on. And so as I talk to the process, I'll talk about how we tested the tool with that audience in particular. And we really wanted it to, in terms of who we wanted to use the tool, it's folks like you. And it's also, we imagined that agency staff who are actually doing the work themselves and trying to convey to their decision makers, their leadership. We imagined it could be helpful for them as well. And we hope that many others pick it up and find it useful. But we really wanted it to be focused for, um, you know, communications teams, advocates like myself who are having one-on-one conversations with policy staff. And so they felt more confident, so people could feel a little more confident in using plain language to talk about the health of our river systems and how to improve it. So I might just pause and see if there's any questions before I go on to how we did it. Are there any questions about what we were trying to achieve and why we would go about creating a messaging guide?
I'm curious if you went into this knowing that that was the format you kind of ultimately like a handbook was the end product of this, or if there was any um, decision making around like what the
What it would
thing
look
would
like?
be. Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting because it was actually fairly hard to get. So many of these types of handbooks are um, are developed and they're sort of confidential in nature because they're developed for a specific campaign or for a specific group of people working a specific place. And our goal was to actually develop a tool that could be shared more widely. We didn't post it on LinkedIn, and we didn't like throw it out everywhere, but we knew that we were going to share it through networks. And so we needed to be able to stand alone. So if you weren't involved in it at all, you could pick it up and read about why it was developed and who the audience was and the recommendations. Um, it actually started out as a slide deck, and apparently a lot of communications firms do this. Is they instead of developing like a handbook like this, you could print this one out, right? But they develop slides that are a little bit more bulleted, use bullets and other things. And we just wanted ultimately a final product that if you weren't part of the 40 plus people that participated, that you could pick it up and read through it and understand why it was developed for whom and what the audiences that we had tested this for and who was involved and then ultimately what the recommendations were for messaging.
I'm just curious, coming from a marketing background, if you made a distinction between marketing content and communications, or if you embraced a marketing mindset and sort of framework and terminology from the get-go, or or if there, how you looked at it as you were
Yeah,
starting
that's
out.
interesting question. Since I'm not in the market, I've never been in the marketing space personally. I never used that term and thought about it through that lens, but we really wanted it to be more of, about guidance for how to have the conversations, for how to tell stories, for it's not just about the language, but as you all know, how you approach conversations, how you approach the materials you're developing, whether you lead with the benefits or you lead with the problem. Like we were trying to, I think, really focus less on marketing and more on a guidance document that set out some sort of guiding principles, I guess, about how to use it, recognizing that it be used, that everybody would use it differently and that they would
Mhm.
need to nobody can like just like pick it up and like put it in like you need to figure out how it relates to the work you're doing and what parts of the guidance are useful for you and I think that's going to be really different for somebody like myself who works for a national organization than it might be for Megan, who's developing something for the Buda River communities. And so we recognized that it really needed to be adaptable to
Mhm.
a variety of different folks.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting because yeah, when you start talking about sales and marketing, it sounds kind of crass and like tactical. And yeah, I'm just curious where your mindset was because when you also talk about audience and messaging and positioning and how to have conversations, I mean it's all related. Just curious about your framing. So interested to hear more.
Yeah, and at the end you might say, "Oh, that's a marketing document," but given I don't, that's not how I'm trained. It's just not a language that I use or a lens I think through. All right. Well, thanks for those questions and keep them coming. I think it'll make the conversation more interesting if you jump in. But so I wanted to just walk through the process that we took because, we recognized from the beginning that we're a large national organization and, um, we have experience, we brought our own experience to the conversation, but we really wanted to achieve a couple of things from this document or sort of through this process. One, we wanted to make sure that we were engaging people from across the West. So we were hearing about sort of regional nuances and regional needs, recognizing that the needs in Arizona are going to be different than the needs for somebody in Montana. The systems are different. And so we set out to um, really engage a diverse set of folks in the project. And we started by creating a small advisory group. And we had 5 different partners who participated in that advisory group, and they really helped guide the project from start to finish in terms of developing the request for proposals that we shared with communications firms. They were involved in the interviews once we got the proposals from those firms back. They interviewed we collectively we interviewed those teams, and then identified Met Group, Metropolitan Group, which is based in Portland, as the communication partner that we were going to choose for the project. And then once we had Met Group on board, this advisory group met fairly regularly, about once a month, just to talk through the work group meetings that we were going to be having, and just to make sure that Met Group had a handful of folks that they could continue to sort of touch back with, and make sure that they were sort of implementing the project in the ways that we had hoped from the beginning. So that advisory group was really important. They also helped us recruit our messaging team. We ultimately had about 17 advocates and restoration practitioners, and a handful of different other skill sets that we invited to participate in a series of workshops. We had 4 workshops over about the 6-month time frame, and we some of these folks were communications practitioners themselves. Emily, as she said, was participated in the messaging group. We had advocates like myself, so who weren't communications professionals, but were the ones who were having the experiences of talking with decision makers, and could really provide some valuable input on like what messages really weren't working, what we were finding that were resonating. And so we touched base with this group 4 times through a series of 90-minute workshops. And the goal was, really to have this group help shape the messaging, and provide a sounding board to make sure what we were creating was going to be usable for folks. Between messages 1 and 2, well, we had the first meeting with that group. The workshop was about audience development. Who are we trying to talk to? What do they care about? What are the other things, what are their days like in terms of how much stuff is crossing their desk, how much time they're going to have to absorb these materials, et cetera, or absorb whatever it is you hand to them or talk to them about. Our second meeting was about the value proposition for healthy rivers and streams. Really, what are the benefits that we are hoping to gain from restoring these systems? And with those 2 under their belt, the Met Group, our communications partner, developed, some initial thinking around the messaging, but then they paused and went out and did some listening sessions. And they set up listening sessions for private lands program leads. So we had somebody from NRCS Working Lands for Wildlife program who participated. I think it was Tara who said she's doing some consulting with them right now. We had somebody who worked for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, who participated in the conversation. So essentially, like gathering people who were having regular conversations around the benefits these systems were providing to private landowners. We had a listening session for public lands program leads, so folks who worked for BLM, for National Park Service, U.S. Forest Service, to sort of, again, sort of sit down for Met Group. I wasn't involved in these. So Met Group sat down with these folks and talked to them about some of the initial, sort of what they had heard and what they were thinking about, and talked through sort of a set of questions with these folks. We had a group of science thought leaders who they sat down with. And then we also had some restoration practitioners who were involved in the conversations. Amongst all those groups, there were folks who were actually doing restoration too. And then finally, instead of a group, we actually Met Group met one-on-one with tribal fish and wildlife staff and leaders. So they did a series of conversations one-on-one with tribes. Because that felt like the best way to really understand specific tribes' needs. And so they really wanted to help they wanted to bring in additional formative input from these folks through that listening session process. And that informed the first set of the first version of the messaging guide, or the message really. And so then they came back to the messaging team for two more sets of meetings or workshops, where they first, in meeting three, they introduced the preliminary messaging, and then in meeting four, they came back and had really a full draft messaging handbook presentation. And between those meetings, there was a significant amount of time between all the meetings for folks on the messaging team to provide input, to use the online tools that they provided for people to weigh in, to send written feedback. They really were open to any type of feedback that partners brought to the table. And then ultimately, we finalized oh, actually, sorry. We had a very strong, after meeting four, we had a good sense of where we were at. And then we did some message testing. And so they met with some federal land management leadership. They met with some House and Senate staff, some Western governors staff, and natural resource leaders. And they walked through like they were just going to have a conversation with these folks and sort of try to, use the language itself. And they got some really good feedback around what worked, and ended up doing, a handful of tweaks before it was ultimately finalized. But that was the way we tested the messaging. It didn't make sense in this case to do any polling because we weren't really trying to influence the general public. We were trying to influence a very specific set type of individual who was making decisions around funding, or implementing policy decisions, or prioritizing this work within an agency. And so we really wanted to speak to those types of folks, rather than sort of the general public. So no polling really was needed for this project. We ultimately rolled it out, and shared it through existing networks that we had. Folks who were on the advisory committee and the messaging group, they shared it through different mechanisms and groups and networks that they had. We had a couple of messaging workshops that were online that we invited anybody who had downloaded the tool, or, we shared it out when we shared the link. So we had these two webinars, and that's basically the rollout that we did this it was sort of midsummer of last year. So we also did a 6-month effectiveness survey, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but I would love to pause and see what questions people have.
Hi, Amy. First of all, thank you for this handbook. It's wonderful. I use it all the time and share it with far and wide with colleagues. So yeah, I found it really helpful. Are you planning to possibly create one for different audiences, like landowners or more general public? I mean, this seems like it can work with those audiences, but like you said, it's definitely more for policymakers.
First, thank you for letting me know that you have it. I've been to your watershed on several occasions for field trips, talking about the role these
Nice.
systems play in wildfire. And it's just great to know that you're finding value in it. We don't currently have plans to do a project for a wider audience. And part of that probably is because the type of work that NRDC does is very focused on policy. And so this was a tool that really felt like it would support the work that we were doing to create the policy changes needed. So folks like you and many others on this call could benefit from, the types of programs that then you could apply for to get funding to do the type of work you do, where we're currently really focused on the nexus between these systems and wildfire resilience. And so we don't do a lot of like communicating with the general public. I can see the value, absolutely, I can see the value of it. And I can see the value of creating something that is very specific to private landowners, because we need so much of this work to be conducted on private lands, given what percent, given the high percentage of these types of systems are in private ownership. So I can absolutely see the value of that, but it's not currently in our plans to do it, but would love if somebody else took that up.
And there's a comment in the chat, just Sandy says it's been very useful in Larimer County as well.
Nice. Thanks, Sandy, for sharing. And I wasn't planning to talk about the messaging itself, but I'm happy to answer any questions about that. But maybe I'll just talk a little bit about the effectiveness survey. We just, it was, we had committed sort of the 6 month point to conduct I don't know, for about lack of a better term, an effectiveness survey, just to see how it was getting used and what people found valuable, and what were some things that they were struggling with or would really benefit from. And so we sent it out to it was like this list of people we knew had been involved in the project. So they'd either signed up for a workshop, they were involved in the messaging group or advisory group. We had all these folks who were either participating in the listening sessions, they were included, and then we had several hundred people who actually who had downloaded the tool, and so we had their email addresses. So we sent it out to that group, and I'm sure we missed a ton of people because Megan shared and Sandy shared, like, oh, I've shared it. And we wouldn't have been able to sort of connect with those folks because we didn't have those emails and relationships ourselves. But we sent it out, and from the folks who did respond, we heard that about a little over 70%, 73% actually, you have used the handbook. And among the users that have used, among the folks who have actually used it, 96% found it effective, either somewhat effective or very effective. And a third of the folks said it was very effective. So that was really nice to hear. And it is great, very affirming to hear Megan and Sandy say that they use it and have found it valuable. We learned that effectiveness rises with how much time you've actually used it. So one of the things we asked about was how often you referred to it, and a couple times a month, once, or it was like once a week, once a month, like how often. And we found that the folks who actually referred to it more found it more effective. And we think that's probably just because they're more comfortable, they're becoming more comfortable with the language, or they just have more familiarity with the recommendations and in the language. I think this will be interesting to this group. We found that large institutions are 3 times more likely to report high impact than mid-sized and small organizations. And part of the reason we think that is we think that probably larger organizations have dedicated communication staff or more time than smaller organizations who have smaller staffs and more demands on those staff to really take that time to sit down with this and to be have the free time to absorb something like this. And I would love feedback if that's not, if you think we have that understanding incorrect. And the primary barriers, part of what informs that is that the primary barriers to deeper adoption are time and capacity, not dissatisfaction with the content. And then we asked folks, I think this was really interesting. We asked people, if we were to do it, like what else would help you use this? What else could you use? And we heard that the thing that people could use the most were implementation ready visual and messaging tools. So one of the ideas that we had put in our list for folks to respond to was like a photo library. And we heard 70% said a photo library of healthy and unhealthy streams would be really valuable. So we're thinking about how we might be able to put such a photo library together. It's a little bit hard given that, photos, you have to get permission on photos, and you're asking for a blanket permission for anybody to use this photo. And so it's a little, we're having to think through how we might work through that. But that's the feedback we got in terms of what could be really helpful would be photos. And I've developed a photo library over the last handful of years, but I'll tell you, it's been hard. And sometimes I'll see a nice photo on somebody's presentation, and I'm like, oh, I would love to have that photo. And it's just, it's hard to get your hands on things that you didn't take yourselves, or you didn't have, a close relationship with a researcher or somebody who's working on the ground. But curious to hear if any of that feedback feels consistent with for folks who have used it, or just the challenge being a smaller organization in terms of having the time to use it.
I'm really curious just about like this process. You had so many different people engaged at multiple steps along the way in different capacities. And I'd love to hear a little bit about like what, like, and you can just focus on like the messaging team or the advisory group, one of these things. What were the value of having multiple people from different organizations involved, and what were some of the challenges doing that throughout this effort?
Well, the value absolutely outweighed the challenges. I'll just lead with that. The value was that in engaging a large, we had over 40 folks who were involved in the project in one way or another, providing substantive input to the project. And the real value was, one was geographic, was making sure that we were hearing from people from different parts of the West. We had people who played really different roles in this work, who actually might be sitting down with congressional staff and using it. And we had folks who were, working with county commissioners or state agencies. And so I think there are going to be different needs that people have, and we really wanted those needs to be reflected. We also really wanted to, people were going to will have had different experiences in terms of using different language and understanding what worked and what didn't work. And we wanted to be hearing from folks, like one of the questions we asked early on, or like, what are the phrases that you use that you think people really understand, whether it's about how you talk about the systems themselves or about the benefits, and what are ways that you've talked about it that you would not use again because they were not effective, or you lost your audience, or for some reason it was challenging in other ways. So we really wanted to have a broad set of folks who are weighing in on that. And I think too, we wanted folks who were actually implementing, like some of the folks who participated, they actually were out on the ground and part of restoration teams in addition to fundraising for projects. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't have just a bunch of folks who did policy work who were sort of engaged in the project. We really wanted to make sure that we had different perspectives. And one thing we did that I didn't actually mention in the process part was we did a final science review. We work closely with a handful of scientists who work in this space, and we asked them to review the final document just to make sure that none of the claims in the document were exceeding or none of the words or phrases were exceeding what the science tells us is actually happening, or the benefits that these systems are providing. And so that's just really important. And we wanted to make sure that folks felt confident in using it that there had been a science review. And so you can actually look at any of those and say, wow, I actually can say that because the folks who are developing the science in this space have reviewed it and they feel like we have the knowledge to make those claims. And that was really important to us. So I didn't mention that piece of the process, but does that answer, Emily, or anything else you think I could pull out, tease
Yeah,
out?
I'm curious. I guess just thinking about some of the challenges of getting a lot of people and like just being part of the messaging group, there are times where it would kind of turn into like nitpicking over wording, and that kind of stuff can be really, really tricky when you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And I'm curious if there were any lessons that you learned from this process that you might take forward with you when like engaging with people and with multiple perspectives to develop messaging in the future.
Yeah, no, it was tricky because there were absolutely different perspectives on it, and we used a little bit of a sort of a multiple approaches there. We went out to a handful of different folks who went to those listening session. Like we used multiple ways to test that we were on the right track, and we were very open and provided long periods of time for people to weigh in. And we actually started this process, or we were sort of in the middle of this process last January, February, March, April. And if anybody remember, like if you all remember back to that time period, it was a crazy time. And people had funding for suspended, tribes had, just all of their funding was up in the air. It was challenging to, we had folks who had agreed to participate in the project who were like, I just don't have the capacity at this moment to participate, even to share a couple of hours. And we like absolutely understood that. And so that was one of the challenges that we faced. Um, and there is going to be a difference of opinion. And we ultimately used listening sessions to help, like if there were multiple approaches to how the messaging could work, we used those listening sessions that were with sort of our target audience to work through some of those. And then when we at the end, we did a final, like really close read through before it went to the science team for review. And that was done by the advisory committee. So that was a group of 5 folks. And we needed a smaller number. We invited everybody to participate and provide their input. We addressed their input. We sent it back, invited more input, and then we ultimately had the messaging advisory group who did the final read through and did flags and that we had to chase down with our science review and other things. So
Yeah, that tiered, multiple kind of different steps of people that this is going through. I could see that being really helpful and just making it less chaotic.
it also gave us more confidence in it. The fact that we did engage so many people. Um, And we wanted people to be able to look at the list of participants and say, oh, I know this person and that person. And I can, if they were participant, like, there's some level of like who developed this and who was involved. And I think it was, we really wanted people, if they weren't involved in the project directly, to be able to look at the list and say, oh, okay, they sat down with scientists, they sat down with some agency staff, they sat down with some, these people, and oh, I know these 3 people. Okay, I'm glad if they were involved there, I have some confidence in this. And so that was actually another way to expand the sort of confidence around the messaging, was for people to see who was actually involved in the project. We didn't list the agency staff who were involved, but we did list the agencies that were represented in the project.
Do you have any other questions for Amy or anybody that's used this handbook? Want to share a little bit about how they've used it, or anybody that's done something kind of similar on their own? It doesn't necessarily have to be this big of a scale, but this kind of getting in a group and trying to figure out what we're all saying at the same time.
I haven't seen it yet. I'm eager to take a look. And I'm, referencing my background a little bit, though, I am curious how difficult it would be to extrapolate out to other audiences. When we did a rebranding, part of that was a messaging matrix where we identified those audiences and then those core messaging points, and then we're able to create that messaging for each audience. So I don't know. I'm very curious to take a look at this. Sounds like Megan's been getting a good use out of it already. So that's great.
And it might turn out that it's not that different, but what we can say with confidence, given the project, the sort of approach we took, is that we think with the types of decision makers that we're trying to reach and that folks are trying to reach, that these messages will be helpful and that they'll resonate with the goals and the types of things that they're experiencing. And we knew that it would just require a different approach and a set of research to make sure it was, valuable for private landowners, going back to, I think it was Megan's question about that. So I would love to see somebody I'd love to have the capacity to do that and the funding to do that.
Carly just threw in the chat too that it's been really helpful for her doing grants, writing grants, and one pagers about projects. So that's, it's not necessarily quite the intended audience, but that's definitely.
Oh, it was though. It was.
Useful. Yeah.
Funders, whether they be decision makers at agencies or they be funders, that was actually we sort of had funders look so different, right? They can be a private foundation, but they can also be the Bureau of Reclamation's, funding opportunity that they're advertising right now. So that was part of it. And I'm thrilled, Carly, that it's been helpful in that way.
And Emily has a question in the chat about beyond the post survey, do you anticipate any other follow-up with users on how it was used or how, like, where gaps might have been or any other needs for similar tools?
We don't have anything planned right now. We did have some folks as part of the survey we did. We asked if they'd be willing to do a focus group, and it would be Met Group, our communications partner, who would conduct that. We did have several folks who said, yeah, I'd be happy to participate and tell you how I've used it. And again, this is all about like, how do we use these tools? It's valuable information for us. I think it's valuable information for our funder, who we want to share this with, so they have a sense of how it was used. And if they fund projects like this in the future, we want to share our learnings with them so they can be successful in supporting grantees in the future. And it's also valuable for Met Group, when they work with NGOs like us in the future or an agency, making sure that the types of projects and how they're running projects and how they're developing the end products, making sure that they're valuable to end users. I'm thrilled that some folks have indicated a willingness to do that, and we haven't decided how that if they'll move ahead with that or not. But I would welcome, Emily, if you have any other ideas or thoughts on what we could be doing. We will certainly circle back if we develop like a photo library.
Yeah, definitely the photo library. I know we've done that with other collaborative groups before, is creating that shared resource. And yeah, it is a lot of work, as you said, Amy, but it is really nice to have.
Would folks here be willing to contribute any great photos they have to a photo library?
The IWDAV definitely would. So
okay,
feel free to hit us up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Sure, I have a bunch.
Nice, thanks, Marguerite.
I think we probably do too.
I bet you do. You guys have done such wonderful work in the big hole. All right, well, I might circle back. Emily, you want to ask your final question?
Yeah, I'm curious about using the outside contractor to manage this whole process. Obviously, a lot of work. Like, it makes a lot of sense to hire someone that really like does this professionally. I guess, what was the decision that led you to go ahead and invest by looking outside your organization? How did that decision-making process go?
We felt it was essential because we did not want this to be NRDC's messaging guide. We thought that for this to be viewed as a tool that was done by a third party who was and really incorporating the feedback and input from over 40 different individuals throughout the process, that having a third party develop it who that like this is what they do is that they develop messaging guides, and they do other things as well, but this is a core part of their work. We thought that that would be really valuable for increasing usability. I don't think it's necessary for every project that we might do as an institution or that you might consider. But for us, it was really important to actually bring on somebody who could be that sort of neutral entity, because we were asking folks who some folks, might not have a lot of experience with NRDC. We have long-term relationships with some of the folks who participated in the project, but we really wanted it to be neutral, and somebody to come in who had deep experience at developing messaging. And specifically, Met Group has done a lot of work on water in the West, and had done projects for agencies on water. And we really liked the expertise that they brought to the project. But we felt it was really important to have a sort of a neutral convener as well, if you will. And that's another way that the advisory group helped. They had relationships that we didn't, as we were recruiting folks to participate either in the messaging team or the listening session. And it really was a community effort. And we thought having a third party facilitate that would really help the process in
Thank
ways that were
you.
really valuable. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was a great answer.